So I've been playing the Nintendo Switch 2 nonstop since the system came out, and I feel like it's time for me to do my official review of the system. I've made videos talking about things I've liked about it. I've made videos talking about things I haven't liked about it. I've made videos talking about several games, but I kind of want to encompass everything into just one video and go into much more detail on the system itself. At the $450 price point, this is the most expensive Nintendo system ever, almost treading into the other competitors' territories of price points. So people are looking at this system under a microscope to see if they want to pick it up or not. So in today's video, we're going to go into great detail about all aspects of the Nintendo Switch 2. It might be a bit of a long one, so you might want to grab a little bit of a snack. Make sure you hit subscribe if you are new to the channel. But without any further ado, let's talk about the Nintendo Switch 2. D-Brand was at the forefront of Nintendo Switch 1 accessories and protection, and now they are back with the Switch 2 Kill Switch, the ultimate in Nintendo Switch 2 functionality and protection. The Switch 2 Kill Switch fits onto your Nintendo Switch 2 like a glove and packs many different features, including the ability to remove JoyCons while still in the case, grips on the JoyCons, a low-profile design to keep the system portable, a dock adapter so you can keep your Nintendo Switch 2 in the Kill Switch case when charging, and of course, most importantly, protects your Nintendo Switch 2 with impact resistance in case, well, you drop it or someone tries to gank it out of your hands. D-Brand is also offering various bundle deals that include things like a travel case with game storage, analog stick grips, and much, much more. Check out the link in the description box and pinned comment down below to get your D-Brand Switch 2 Kill Switch and give yourself the peace of mind when playing your Nintendo Switch 2 in handheld mode. As always, guys, be sure to support the brands that support me, and a huge thank you to D-Brand for sponsoring today's video. So the first thing I want to talk about with the system is the hardware itself. Now, obviously, one of the selling points of the original Nintendo Switch was the fact that it was the hybrid system, a system that you could play in your house or play on the go in handheld mode. Handheld gamers got their handheld system, console gamers got their console system, and the Nintendo Switch 2, upon first inspection, definitely looks a lot like the Nintendo Switch 1, especially when you are in portable mode with the system. However, things are a bit different. Everything feels a bit larger. The screen itself is larger. The dimensions of the system are larger as well, comparative to the Nintendo Switch OLED and original Nintendo Switch. Obviously, if you factor in the Switch Lite as well, this is a much more larger system, but I still feel like it retains the portability aspect of it. The first thing you're obviously going to notice is the screen of the system. Now, whereas the Nintendo Switch OLED had an OLED screen, this system is actually going back to the LCD screen. Does it look quite as good as the OLED screen? It kind of depends on your eyes. I feel like the brightness levels of the OLED screen are a little bit larger than what you see on this LCD screen, but I think the Switch 2 makes up for it in terms of how the games actually look and perform on the system. Now, this screen for the Nintendo Switch 2 is a 1080p up to 120 hertz screen, so games are going to look better on this system by default because of the fact that the screen is capable of more things. On the Nintendo Switch 1, the maximum resolution was 720p and 60 frames per second. As far as comfort is concerned when holding it in your hands, it doesn't feel much different than the Nintendo Switch 1 for both kind of good and bad, which we'll get into in just a moment. Now, the battery life of the system in portable mode has kind of been a debate online since the system came out. When you first get the system, it does have a charge to it, and you'll probably just want to start playing. But a lot of gamers noticed that it didn't seem like the battery was lasting all that long. So much, in fact, that Nintendo actually put up like an FAQ of some weird thing that you have to do to kind of cycle the battery in order for it to get maximum efficiency out of it, because according to Nintendo, it should last you anywhere from 2.5 to 6.5 hours when in handheld mode. Now, obviously, that's contingent on the type of game you are playing and, of course, the fact of your brightness level on the system. But it does seem kind of weird that they have to put out an FAQ just for like a battery. Like, it seems like it should just work and you take it out of the box. When it gets low, you charge it and it does what it's supposed to do. Speaking of the comfort level, we do have to talk about the JoyCons themselves, because that's what you will be gripping a lot when playing in portable mode. Now, the JoyCons themselves feel very similar to what the Nintendo Switch 1 brought to the table, and that's both a good thing and kind of a bad thing in my opinion. I do like that the JoyCons feel much sturdier. I like the magnetic ability of them for connecting instead of the rails. It has a little button that allows you to disconnect the Nintendo Switch 2 Joy-Con from either the system or the dog bone controller, and they definitely feel a bit more premium. However, the analog sticks themselves seem to be very similar to what we saw on the Nintendo Switch 1, and if you know anything about that, well, you would know that Joy-Con drift was kind of a problem with the system. I know some people swear that Joy-Con drift was just something made up by anti-Nintendo people, but I actually experienced Joy-Con drift with several different pairs of Joy-Cons on my Switch 1, so that's not necessarily something I'm hoping to see in this system. I do have to say, though, the mouse functionality is actually pretty interesting. In compatible games, you can essentially just turn your Joy-Con to the side and use it as a mouse. You can also do this on the home screen of the system as well, which I think is pretty cool. The kickstand for the Nintendo Switch 2 has been upgraded as well. It still feels a little bit flimsy, but you get many more different viewing angles if you would like to play the system in tabletop mode, and I think that's a pretty cool thing. Overall, I think the experience in handheld mode is definitely a bit superior to what you got on the Nintendo Switch 1, strictly because of the fact that the screen is allowing for higher resolutions and higher refresh rates. So by default, your games do look a lot better. I think the Joy-Cons themselves are fine. I do wish there was some sort of grip on the back of them as far as a texture is concerned, but you can always buy the D brand controller grip for the Joy-Cons that I highly, highly recommend if you're playing the system in handheld mode. Then, of course, we have the Nintendo Switch 2 in docked mode. Now, before speaking about docked mode, let's talk about the dock itself. I will say I think that the dock is nice in terms of the design. I like the rounded edges, but I do not really care for this back flap on it. It kind of always seems to come off for me. It feels a bit flimsy, and the dock itself actually feels a little bit flimsy as well when it's in your hands. Comparative to everything else with this system that feels very premium and very high quality, I feel like the dock just kind of feels a bit, I don't know, limp wrist would kind of be what I would describe it. It's fine, you know, it's functional and it works well enough. But when you're having to go in and re-plug in things, if you're wanting to move to a different TV or something like that, the back of it always seems to pop off. So much, in fact, that I just leave the back off of it completely. When playing the Nintendo Switch 2 in docked mode, however, I think this is where the system really shines because of all of the different things that it has over the predecessor system. Now, obviously, the Nintendo Switch 1 would max out at 1080p 60 frames per second in docked mode, but this system has many more graphical options. You can do 4K graphics, 2K graphics, 1080p. You could do variable, or you could do different refresh rates as far as the system is concerned for the games, up to 120 hertz in a game that is 1080p or 4K 60. Now, not many games really support these higher specs of the system right now. A game like Fast Fusion does with 4K 60 mode that looks absolutely gorgeous when playing in TV mode, but there's also things like HDR support for lighting, and that varies on a game-by-game basis. I did forget to mention that there is variable refresh rate on the portable mode as well. For whatever reason, it's not in docked mode, which is kind of weird, but that essentially allows for the game to hit targeted frame rates when in portable mode, I guess to kind of alleviate battery life. You also have DLSS, which is prevalent in both the handheld and docked mode, and is something that definitely will increase the graphical fidelity of games that maybe can't hit it in terms of the raw hardware itself. So it can essentially upscale an image to look like a higher resolution when being rendered at a lower resolution to keep up the performance of the game. I don't really care like how a game gets to the performance levels, as long as it gets to the performance levels that are suitable for a 2025 game. I am pleased with that. So I think the inclusion of things like DLSS and HDR and up to 4K support definitely make this feel a bit of a jump from the original Nintendo Switch system. Like, imagine some of these games trying to run on the Nintendo Switch. It obviously wouldn't happen. So overall, when in docked mode, I think it's actually a very, very snappy experience. And that goes into just how you do things on the system itself. Whether you are in docked or in portable mode, everything just feels so much snappier. There's not really that sort of delay when you're choosing things on a menu, for instance, like there was on the original Nintendo Switch. This actually is an important part of the Nintendo eShop as well, because the eShop actually works now. And this is one of the most welcoming things for the Nintendo Switch 2. I felt the Switch eShop was absolutely terrible in terms of being able to navigate anything, discover anything, and just find games that you're looking for. Not necessarily because of all the bizarre hentai games, but I mean, that didn't really help the situation, but more so just how laggy it was and how unresponsive. However, on the Nintendo Switch 2, it is extremely responsive. It is pretty much instantaneous, and I feel that is a huge, huge upgrade over the predecessor system. So what's new with the UI of the Nintendo Switch 2? Because it looks a lot like the Nintendo Switch 1. Well, there's really two things that I find to be the most interesting when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2 and upgrades over the system, because you are right. It does look exactly like the Nintendo Switch 1. Same size icon, same system as far as navigating your games, but there's obviously some things that are a bit different. The game chat is now added into the Nintendo Switch 2, which is represented by the C button on your right Joy-Con. And this is something that you do have to have Nintendo Switch Online in order to use. So, you know, kind of locked behind a paywall, but this was something that I anticipated wouldn't work very well at all. But surprisingly, it does. Now, not necessarily in the video quality side of things. The video seems to be at about 15 frames per second if you are screen sharing with someone. So you can't really you kind of get a gist of what is happening in their game, what is happening on their screen, but it's not like you're watching a streamer play a game. So that is something to keep in mind. However, I do feel like the voice quality is excellent on this thing, and you don't even have to be right next to your system. You could be across the room or even in a different room, and the system still somehow picks up your voice even without utilizing a headset. And I think this is something that not a lot of people are really talking about, just how impressive it is. The use of a system without a headset to both talk and hear individuals is actually a big game changer, in my opinion, because you don't really need any additional hardware with it. You also have the virtual key card situation that we'll talk about in just a little bit, but that is on the main menu system. And then you also have game sharing, which if you've played Nintendo handhelds such as the Nintendo DS, you kind of know what this is, but essentially it allows you to share a game with someone and they are able to experience the game with you without having to pick up a copy of the game. You can actually use this to stream games to the Nintendo Switch 1 as well. I'll be showing a little clip of Spawnwave's video here. He seemed to have some trouble with it, but there have been lots of reports of people utilizing it in a positive manner, and someone even said that they played a game across the country on game share mode. I don't really know how you do that. I'm not here to share games with anyone. If you want my games, you better pay me money. But this is a nice feature that has been added into the system, and I think it's something very cool. Then, of course, you have your different game types. You have your digital games, your key card games, and your physical standard games. Although the physical standard game definitely feels more like an anomaly than something that you will be actually seeing quite a bit of. But this also plays into the UI system and the virtual key cards and standard game key cards and digital games and stuff. It's honestly a bit confusing, but to kind of summarize what it is your virtual game cards are stored onto your Nintendo Switch 2 account. So pretty much anything you've ever downloaded will be on here for you to re-download the game again if you bought a game digitally. Now, a digital purchase is still the same as it always is. It kind of plugs it into a system, and then you are good to go, added to your virtual key card scenario. The game key cards themselves are the things that you would purchase from a retailer. Essentially, this is a game on a kind of cloud sort of thing. So you pop in the game key card cartridge, it downloads the game onto your system, and then you can play the game with that key card in the system, the actual physical cartridge itself. So you can't take the game key card out and still play the game like you would do with a standard digital download. You have to have that game key card in. It's kind of confusing, all the different types of games, and this is something we'll talk about in the concerns section, which is coming out, because honestly, I could see most companies kind of using these key cards instead of doing standard physical releases, and I'll give you guys that reason why. Then, of course, we have to talk about the performance of games running on the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, I have been playing quite a few different games, and I have videos up on all of these games on the channel, so make sure you check out those videos if you haven't yet to get the more in-depth look at how these games look and perform, and if they're worth picking up or not on the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, the flagship title is, of course, Mario Kart World, the mythical $80 video game. And I have to say, I think this might be my favorite Mario Kart game of all time. It definitely looks very sharp in handheld mode, but once you play this on a TV or a monitor with like HDR support and, you know, the visuals start to really pop and shine, it's an absolutely fantastic looking and performing game. There are no frame rate drops or anything like that. There's a lot of attention to detail happening as well. I really enjoy the free roam mode of the game too. I think this game is a nice launch title for the system because look at what was the most popular game on the Nintendo Switch 1. Guess what? It was Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I know some people think that it's, you know, kind of a weird launch title for the system, but sales numbers don't lie. Statistics don't lie. And Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is one of the highest selling games of all time, so it makes sense for that to be here. Cyberpunk 2077 is an interesting title as well because of the fact that this game seemed a bit outside of the realm for the Nintendo Switch 2. The port, however, is pretty solid. Now, the maximum performance you're going to get is 1080p at 40 frames per second when in docked mode, and that is on a performance mode for the game. And I've heard that the performance mode kind of fluctuates as well. It targets 40 frames per second. I decided to play the game on quality mode at 30 frames per second. I'm about 12 or so hours into the game now, and I think for the most part, it's a pretty impressive looking game. The image does look a bit softer on the Nintendo Switch 2 in portable mode, but in handheld mode, I think this is a really nice kind of technical showcase as far as what the Switch 2 can do. Is it perfect? Is it as good as the PlayStation 5 or the Xbox Series X or a high-end PC? No, not by any stretch of the imagination, but it more than holds its own when in docked mode, and the game also offers HDR10 support, which definitely adds a nice layer of visual fidelity to the game. Sonic Cross Shadows, or Sonic X Shadows Generations, is another game that hits its target performance rates at 60 frames per second. It looks great, it plays great, it runs great. Not exactly the most taxing sort of game in the world, but it is a game that released onto the modern platforms of the current generation, such as the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series, and I feel like the Nintendo Switch 2 version retains everything that those versions of the game has. Street Fighter 6 is another game that is very visually impressive on the Nintendo Switch 2 because arguably it looks better than the Xbox Series S version of the game. The character models themselves are more detailed, the fighting action is very fast and fluid with no frame rate drops. Once again, doesn't look as good as the PlayStation 5 or the Xbox Series X version, but it's pretty damn close all things considered, and the controls are extremely responsive in this game. The reason I bring up things like the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X instead of talking about things like the Steam Deck is because Steam Deck versions of these games that I've mentioned are not in the same kind of league as the Switch 2 versions. You can look at comparisons of games like Cyberpunk and Street Fighter 6, and the Nintendo Switch 2 version is superior in terms of the graphical fidelity. I think it's more kind of in line to compare it with the Xbox Series S in terms of performance and visual quality, and I think most of these games hit the same marks as things like the Xbox Series S does, and maybe even exceed it in some certain standards and in some certain games and in some sorts of practicalities. You also have to remember that this is just the launch lineup of these games. When I play a game like Mario Kart World, I definitely get the feeling that like a 3D platformer like a new Mario game or maybe even the new Donkey Kong game are going to be absolutely breathtaking experiences in terms of the visuals because you've never really seen Nintendo using things at this sort of high fidelity. Let's talk about some concerns with the system, though, because I'm not a fanboy, I'm not a shill, and obviously there are some things to be a bit worried about. Like I said before, the battery situation is kind of strange. I don't really like that whole sort of thing with having to adjust and recalibrate your battery according to an FAQ. That seems like a bit of an oversight when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2 as far as the system is concerned. I've also noticed that the system can get very warm on prolonged gameplay experiences, especially when you're playing a game like Cyberpunk 2077 that is a more taxing sort of game. That's something that I feel like could be addressed in a firmware update. They can, sort of recalibrate when the fan for the system comes on, because it definitely seems like this system has more cooling than the standard Nintendo Switch did, but still, I would like to see that fan kick on a bit earlier. Then, of course, you have the $80 price point of some Nintendo Switch 2 software. Games like Mario Kart World, I feel like if this game came out at $70, nobody would be complaining about it. But having that $80 price point kind of makes you wonder where Nintendo is going to go with the price of things like their first-party games. What kind of determines what is an $80 game versus a $70 game? Because now things are getting more expensive. The fact that you can't use your standard micro SD cards is a conversation that some people are having. You need to use a micro SD express card. For me personally, I kind of understand this. The read-write speeds are much better on the Express card, so I feel like it does make sense that that would be prioritized so that games actually look and can run and the data can access the micro SD card in a timely manner, whereas if you did a standard card, it would have some issues. And another concern that people are having is now that the system is out, there have been events that have taken place with many different third-party games, and there's no Nintendo Switch 2 logos really shown on anything. The only game that was shown with the Switch 2 logo at the Xbox presentation, whereas the PlayStation 5 logo was on pretty much everything, was Tony Hawk 3 and 4 Remastered, which was a game that was, of course, announced during the Nintendo Switch 2 reveal. That is something I feel like people should keep an eye on, how third parties are going to handle the Nintendo Switch 2. Is it a situation where Nintendo is kind of holding back and telling companies, hey, we're going to show your stuff at an upcoming Nintendo Direct? And if that's the case, like, when does that Direct kind of happen? I guess would be a conversation piece for this. So is the Nintendo Switch 2 perfect? No, but I also don't feel that any system is. There are definitely complaints and concerns that are tied in with the system, but for me personally, this is exactly what I wanted out of a Nintendo Switch successor. I wanted a beefier, better Nintendo Switch to be the Nintendo Switch 2. I didn't want some crazy gimmick. I didn't want Nintendo to reinvent the wheel with the system or anything like that, because I feel like you finally found the wheel that is going to propel you in the future. I think this hybrid model of systems is what Nintendo is going to do until the end of time at this point in time, because it makes them unique. It makes them stick out in this landscape of video game consoles. I really enjoy the Nintendo Switch 2 and the additional power that it has over the Switch 1. I didn't even really talk about the backwards compatibility stuff, but people are finding, myself included, I made a video on it, that many Switch 1 games are now running better on the Nintendo Switch 2. And I feel like that kind of opens up a bit of a thing for developers to where maybe they can do patches for their games to increase the visual fidelity to match the increased performance that the Nintendo Switch 2 will do by default. Now, the $450 price point is definitely a large price point. And when you look at the software library right now, I feel like that will kind of determine when you will want to pick up one of these systems. If you're a diehard Mario Kart fan, I think Mario Kart World is a great game, especially when you buy it in the $500 bundle that saves you essentially $30 on the game. And there's a lot of good third-party ports that are out there right now as well, but you might have played these third-party ports on another platform. I think after we get a Nintendo Direct, we'll get a more clear vision of the future of this system and kind of what to expect. But overall, I'm very happy with this system, and I think the future is very bright because we're getting to the point with a lot of these games where they take so long to make. Games on the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X seem to be taking longer and longer and longer. And yeah, eventually a PlayStation 6 and an Xbox Series successor is going to come out. But how much can you really push games as far as visual fidelity is concerned? How much can you really do, and how long is that going to take? I know a lot of people are worried about the future of the Nintendo Switch 2, how it stacks up to other handheld PCs, and how it stacks up to the other consoles. But the Switch 1 did fine. And realistically speaking, the Switch 1 was a lot less powerful than it probably should have been. At least with the Nintendo Switch 2, we're already seeing very, very positive results from tons of different games. And I feel like it's just going to get better over time as developers get more familiar with the hardware itself. But it really comes down to your personal preference. You might want to wait till the holiday season or after a Nintendo Direct to see kind of what the upcoming future for the system is. But there is that whole tariff thing looming on the horizon, so maybe it's better to buy now than later. As for me personally, though, I'm very pleased with this system. I've been having a blast playing it, and I will continue to have a blast playing it. And I'm very excited for the future of the games as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know this is a longer video than I normally made on the channel before, but I really had a lot of things to say. I kind of wanted to talk about every different facet of the system. So I hope you guys appreciate these longer form videos. And if you do, hey, maybe I'll make more of these. Let me know if you decided to pick up a Nintendo Switch 2 or planning on picking one up, or if you're not interested, in the comments section down below. And if you tell me you're not interested, but you watched all the way till the end of this video, like, you're a cool dude. Like, don't let anyone, or chick, or individual, it's 2025, you gotta say individual, you're a cool person. Unless you don't identify as a human, then whatever, man. I can't keep up with all that stuff. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Be sure to like, comment, and share. Be on the lookout for other videos. Make sure you check out all of my individual game videos as well, so you can get an in-depth look at these games running and performing on the Nintendo Switch 2. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.